Welcome back, guys. Welcome to the second episode of PodCompass, our very own in-house podcast. I'm your host, Stormtrooper. Today, we're only joined by one guest, Legolas. Welcome back, Legolas.
Hi, Stormtrooper. Glad to be back on the podcast.
Welcome, welcome. Our topic for the day is the normalization in India-China ties, what it means, and what it could mean in the future in a potential Trump presidency. Legolas, if you could just brief us on what's been the most recent development on that front.
Right. Our India's NSA, Ajit Doval, has visited China and he has had talks with Wang Yi from the Chinese side. And there have been, after the meeting, there have been significant outcomes of the meeting. And
This Wang Yi is their foreign minister.
yeah, he's a foreign minister.
Okay, I think there were
So
like some five or six areas they agreed upon or something.
yeah, they agreed on six major outcomes. So
Hmm.
one is that they want to maintain peace and tranquility, and both countries have agreed to continue taking measures to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas. And then they want to promote bilateral relations, and they have also agreed to resume the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, which is
Oh, all
considered,
right.
yeah, and it's considered a very important pilgrimage in Hinduism. So
I
that's a
think
big.
this has been put on pause for quite a few years. I think 2018, 2019 must have been the last Mansarovar Yatra.
Yeah, I think it stopped during the COVID time. And even after India opened up, China hasn't actually opened up. They did not renew their travel arrangements from their side.
Okay,
So
so
the
was
yatra
this
was put
Yatra
on
an
hold.
actual pilgrim? Was it an actual trek, or I think people would just go on a private flight around the mountain because you're not allowed to trek there or something, right?
No, but you're allowed to do the pradakshina of the mountain. So
Okay,
you'll
and
have to
that's
go
done by
to,
on a plane.
no, walking, walk
Okay, all right, all right.
at least, or you can even have a darshan of the Kailash mountain.
Okay, so this is
So,
going to be resumed soon.
right.
Okay, what are the other areas?
The other areas are, well, both sides have agreed to enhance cooperation on cross-border rivers.
Okay,
Tibet, which is in China, is home to many of the Himalayan rivers, right? So that's also a major issue.
all right.
And then there is also a consensus from both sides to reopen the Nathula border trade point.
What's the significance of this Nathula border?
I think during the one of the India-China wars, there was
Mhm.
a Battle of Nathula.
Okay.
It's a mountain pass in the Himalayas. It's near Sikkim. It's a,
Oh, this
like
was reopened in 2006 after it was closed in 1962. That's what
okay,
Grok says. All right. So I think we had discussed a lot of these. We didn't discuss this specifically, but in the last episode, or rather the first ever episode of Pod Compass, where you guys can find the link in the description, where we briefly glossed over how a Trump presidency would impact India-China ties and how the announcement of disengagement and de-escalation that was made last month by both sides was a natural consequence of, Trump inevitably coming to power, where we had gone over how Trump is, he's not an anti-Russia hawk. He's not obsessed with Russia like the current establishment is in the US, and that he's more of an anti-China, anti-Iran hawk. So funding will probably be pulled out of Ukraine and be thrown towards, let's say, Taiwan, South China Sea, and
yeah,
whatnot. So,
yeah,
given how China has such a huge landmass and they have two fronts, right? One front, the Western front being with India, and the Eastern front being with, South Korea, Japan, and South China Sea. So I think it's a natural consequence of them reallocating their resources from their Western front to their Eastern front, right? So
right.
I think it makes a lot of sense from their perspective as well. But I think, Legolas, what we need to do is we need to be careful. I think from what I've seen on Twitter, people are slightly getting carried away with this recent news of normalization in ties.
Yeah, yeah,
So the
yeah.
issue
So
still remains that two of the largest populated countries in the world, aspirational powers, have their own ambitions in the neighborhood in the region. They will
absolutely.
and with such a huge land border, there will definitely be pressing issues going forward that will be very difficult to resolve. Don't you think so?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And uh, so as we mentioned in the last episode, the world is moving towards a multipolar uh,
Right.
world order. And then naturally, so India and China will come to the forefront. And as you said, both are aspirational powers. So naturally, there will be friction. And there's such a huge border between India and China. So yeah, we shouldn't be too complacent about it. But it's a good sign that,
It's definitely a good sign in the right direction. I mean, for a country that's been increasingly surrounded by hostile
yeah,
powers or powers backed or propped up by hostile entities. If you look at what's happened in Bangladesh, if you
true.
look at what's happened in Nepal recently, Pakistan, we don't need to mention. I mean, it's not worth the mention, but we are surrounded by hostile entities, and to see one entire front go quiet, at least in the short term, must be a big relief for policy planners in New Delhi as well. I think the main issue that remains is there will be fundamental disagreements over philosophical disagreements
Yes,
over India and China's place in the future. What role
yeah,
will India play in the next, let's say, 2 or 3 decades in the shaping of South Asia and Southeast Asia? So I think those ambitional issues might remain, but definitely a good step in the right direction. On that note, there is some interesting chatter I caught up on X on Twitter. I don't know if you've
oh,
heard about this,
okay,
that southern Bangladesh, that in the
yeah.
south of Bangladesh, the Myanmar war has spilled over into
Oh,
southern
okay.
Bangladesh.
Is that?
So this is the Arakan army. It's a Buddhist militia, and they're obviously anti-junta. But what
Yeah.
the chatter so far has been conveying is that both China and India have been backing
Hmm.
this particular group recently,
Okay.
and this is our way of, putting pressure on a US-backed establishment
Right.
in Bangladesh.
Right. Right. So India is not keeping quiet. They are doing something behind the curtain. They're ensuring
Absolutely.
that.
I mean, that's a good point you brought up because most of what you see, the commentary around Bangladesh seems to be a lot of anger against the Indian government for apparently not doing enough.
Yeah.
But that's the case over here. We have an outgoing establishment in the US
Right.
who have opened up so many fronts around the world. You see what's happened in Syria, what's happening in Taiwan, what's happening in Ukraine. In Georgia, they're doing a regime change. Bangladesh, we've already seen what happened. So it's a
Yes. Yes.
bait. They will use Bangladesh to get us to react, to provoke us, to poke us and prod us, to see where our red lines lie. And I think so far the Indian government has done a good job of balancing its options. That
Yeah.
in public, our lip service is that of cooperation and
Yeah.
coordination. But if we
Yes.
are doing stuff like this behind
Yeah.
their back, so this is masterclass, right? This is a foreign
Yeah. Yeah.
policy masterclass,
Yeah.
which normal people really fail to grasp often.
Right. I saw a news uh, on like today. So apparently, India has opened its embassy in North Korea. I think
Oh
reopened
wow,
it. It was closed for a few years, but now it's been reopened.
that must
This
be.
is
Oh,
this is I
this must have
think
happened
this is
after
also
3 years. Yeah,
reopened
this
after three
happened after three
years.
years. Yep.
Right,
Yeah, so you can see how India is really stepping up its efforts in terms of balancing its ties. That
right,
just because, we are fine, we'll be partners with the US, we'll be partners with the West, but that does not mean that we won't develop our own unique bilateral relationships with the Eastern world, with the so-called perceived, what the West calls the Eastern world, right?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And this comes amid reports of North Korea and Russia moving together, like integrating their military. There were reports a few months
Yeah,
ago.
there are unconfirmed reports of North Korean troops, in fact, even suffering casualties on the front lines in Ukraine.
Right,
Now,
right.
why Russia would need to do that is anyone's guess. I don't know why. They haven't even done full mobilization yet. They're still
Mhm.
using, they haven't even tapped up their reserves. So I don't know what the dynamic, maybe North Koreans needed experience, combat
Yes,
experience. That
yeah,
could be one angle.
yeah. Especially with
Interesting
what
thoughts.
happened with South Korea recently. There was a coup attempt.
The failed coup.
Yeah, the
Well, that
failed
was
coup.
also interesting. So
Yeah,
someone was joking that the average Bollywood movie is longer than how long that coup went on for.
right, right. Yeah,
So that was quite hilarious
yeah,
to see. Probably the most ineffective and coup we've witnessed in recent history, in modern history.
Yes.
So yes, the
Maybe
world
this
is
was
definitely
big.
going through a very rapid transformation. Yeah.
Maybe the coup wasn't backed by the US. That's why it failed.
Probably, you never know. But then the kind of messaging the president was giving, the South Korean president, it just seemed like he was accusing the opposition of being North Koreans and
Yeah.
Chinese CCP agents and whatnot. Sounded a lot like what an American puppet would say. But
Yeah.
anyway, we are coming back to China. The biggest threat for India-China ties now is actually Trump. So the guy who this is what's interesting. The guy who's
Right.
responsible for pushing India and China together right now, right?
Uh-huh.
Because they need to focus on another front, might also be the person who will probably create strains in our ties with China. Because this, as we've discussed in the last episode, in the first episode of this PodCompass, our in-house podcast, that Trump will bring back Quad. He was
Right.
the
Yeah.
guy who really propped up Quad in his first term from 2016 to 2020. So we're going to see the word Indo-Pacific being thrown around a lot. South China Sea, the Philippines. I think that area is going to be very active. Our ties with Australia are going to be very, very important in
Right.
the next 4 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what's interesting about this, that the guy who's pushing India and China closer right now might be the
Yes.
guy who breaks the camel's back
Yeah.
eventually.
Very ironic.
Very, very ironic. So, very interesting world we're heading into as we wait. I think just 1 month to go, exactly 1 month to go until Donald J. Trump assumes office, and we're looking at a brave, brave new world. Uh, Thank you for coming on the show, Nicholas.
Thanks, Stormtrooper. Thanks for having me.
To the viewers, stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye bye.
Bye.